Hello there, Mad Mug here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to talk about some news that is coming out of Disney, and that is that Disney is considering closing all of their theme parks, not just through the summer, but through the fall and part of the winter as well, and not reopening until January of 2021. Now this comes on the heels of they've had a massive shutdown of the parks since mid-March. Reportedly, early reports I think suggested about 50 million a day. Current reports I think are about 20 million a day that Disney is losing as a direct result of the parks being closed. So if they do remain closed for the remainder of the year, which is 7 months, they're going to take a very, very, very hefty price tag, even just the maintenance of not having people there. But uh, the the estimates for how much money they were going to make was going to be about a 50% drop from last year. So they deemed it that it wasn't financially feasible or it wasn't feasible to leave the parks open for the remainder of the year because they would lose more money than they would actually get. So I understand it from that perspective. And this is the thing. I think you're going to see a lot more announcements like this. I know there have been schools that have been debating on whether or not to have the fall semester, colleges and things like that, debating about suspending the fall semester already. There's a number of different things. But the thing is that, and this is kind of an interesting overlook on this whole thing, is that Disney couldn't have been hit harder by this because Disney just had the Fox merger go through midway through last year. And then after that happened, now you have 70, I think it was $76 billion that was invested in just trying to get that through originally. So they were in the whole 72 or 76 billion already. Which is an outrageous number. On top of that, the Star Wars franchise was losing money at the time, which was one of their huge money makers. And then you also had the issues that were starting to develop with the MCU, but it obviously hadn't hit at a financial point at that point. But the thing was, MCU films were starting to crowd at that area, and we all knew it because I think it was 2 years in a row we had three Marvel films in one year, and it was a lot. So you know, now because of the coronavirus, that schedule for those Marvel films and for the rest of their films, which are basically just dotted around those major Marvel tentpole movies, are all moved back. Now, if they choose to delay them a year, then that just means they delay all the projects by a year and they get back on it. But the problem is that when you have a system like what Disney has, where they just kind of it's just a movie factory, if you fuck up the conveyor belt, then you just have a buildup of stuff behind it. And the problem is that maybe stuff that was already in production or stuff that was going on, a lot of those actors have priorities that they are also going to have to shift back a year in order to keep their priority to Disney and to whatever movies they're signed on to. So you have that problem of trying to kind of get the band back together after this whole thing is over to try and finish filming these movies. Um, and again, Hollywood people for the most part are fairly rich, so they can kind of sit around for a year if they really wanted to. But it's just kind of it couldn't have hit that form of movie distribution worse than what it did, because again, we had this discussion, years ago. People were having this discussion about if Marvel were to if something were to happen and we start having major film problems like what was happening on the Star Wars front with Solo and not Last Jedi really, but Solo and then Rise of Skywalker. If you start having production issues like that, you start rushing people, you're going to get crap products, or you're going to get products that are not going to be able to be delivered on time. So if those kept mounting, or if they I shouldn't say kept at the time, there really wasn't any, but if they start mounting, then that means you have more and more problems and more backups, and that film still has to meet that release date and that slate. Otherwise, it bleeds into the next film too much. And again, we've had that discussion before too about placing those films too close together, like having Black Panther and Infinity War in theaters at the same time, and having Captain Marvel and Endgame in theaters at the same time. They were going to eat into each other's profits, and I think the same thing. Spider-Man: Far From Home may have entered theaters when Infinity War was kind of at the very, very tail end of its theatrical release. So, you're not losing too much money. But again, if that had to have been delayed, if you had problems getting Endgame off the ground for whatever reason, whether it was production related or something happened, then you're going to push it back, and then you're going to have to push Spider-Man back, and then you lose that July window. So it's all kind of a it's almost like, if you were to look at a day planner of a month and you have X's out of 29 out of 31 days for shit that's going on. So it kind of follows that logic, but it hit that particularly bad. And the other thing was the Disney parks were really the only thing that was kind of it was a constant for them in terms of bringing in money, except for Galaxy's Edge had a very solid hiccup last fall. But aside from that, the major Disney parks like Disneyland and Disney World, they were still bringing in money for the company in spades. It was the only thing that was really staying at a constant and not losing money from previous years. So now you have the issue of, again, that the only really big profitable part of the company is now shut down for an indefinite period of time. So now you're suffering even worse because you have all the debt that's been accumulated from the Fox deal. So looking at that, this might open some things up for other studios. Because here's the thing: is that Disney is going to, even Bob Iger has even said this, that Disney is going to have to downsize to an extent after this thing is all over, as are other entertainment companies. But the thing that does is, if Disney is making less products, or they're greenlighting less products, that leaves the air open for other studios to kind of get their products in there and take back the piece of the pie that Disney has kind of bought away from the market. Universal is still a big player. Paramount. You still have stuff like Lionsgate that are doing things. Obviously, Warner Brothers. So you still have some big hitters in the movie industry in terms of the studios that surround them. But Disney is obviously, in recent years has risen to be the overlording figure with some ridiculous amount of the film industry that they own. I think it's something like 40-something%, maybe more. But this kind of may give those studios a chance to kind of creep back in, as well as Netflix taking a chunk out of the pie too. Now, the other thing that's kind of going on a positive for Disney is the Disney Plus service, which just passed 50 million subscribers not too long ago. So because people are kind of locked in, a lot of them are looking at streaming services, Disney Plus being one of them, because they do offer a fair amount of different things. Like there's a package I know that has Hulu and ESPN in it and stuff like that, because they own parts of those companies. So people are going to probably take that subscription. The same thing has happened with Netflix, where Netflix has actually become worth more money than Disney because of this. Because Disney's the only thing that's really doing well right now is their digital services, and they don't have nearly the numbers that Netflix already had when this thing happened. So you have that aspect going about it, but there's a lot kind of going into the circle. But ultimately, I think this kind of might have a drawback effect on the movie industry in terms of trying to put, especially single studios like Disney, trying to put out so much material at once. Now, it could have the opposite effect as well. It could be that, okay, they're just going to dump everything on us now. They're going to try and hammer the theaters so that they can try and get people back in the movies. But the thing is that Hollywood studios don't give a shit about movie theaters, and that's kind of a little bit of a misconception that I think a lot of people get, is that because Hollywood has to pay movie theaters. Movie theaters get a certain percentage of the ticket price for the movies that they show, and the percentage is dictated in the distribution deals and stuff like that happened, where a certain amount of money goes back to the studio and a certain amount goes back into the movie theater. Studios would much rather have a streaming model in a lot of cases, and Warner Brothers is actually currently thinking about maybe trying a brief period of streaming exclusive, releasing stuff onto their streaming service instead of putting it into theaters. But again, you do have to change kind of the whole way that people go about making movies if you're going to have that happen. But that is something that's being toyed around with, and because that's the thing, is that other than foreign markets like the Chinese market, they probably care about those theaters because that's the only way those people are getting those movies, unless they pirate them off the internet. So they do care about them in some respects, but as far as the big theater chains go, they don't really give a shit because they realize that streaming is the future of kind of distributing media to people. So the movie theater is becoming obsolete, and they're suffering because of this as well, because movie theaters are pretty much entirely closed down because you can't have public gatherings. in the United States anyway. I don't know what's going on in other countries, but the reason why is that those movie theaters, a lot of the smaller ones aren't going to survive. I think AMC theaters is filing for bankruptcy now to try and get money so they can stay, so they can reopen, which is a huge theater chain. That's another one. So you're seeing a lot of that kind of stuff right now, which again isn't very healthy for the film industry. The entertainment industry got nailed by this, but there is a bit of a silver lining if you try and look for, maybe some things that can come back, when studios start to come back, let's say, the who puts out the first big hit after this thing, goes out? Is this going to be, is it going to be Eternals in November? Is that going to be the one where audiences are going to flood back into the theater? Is it going to be James Bond, which I think is getting a September release? I want to say, no, actually, no, sorry, I stand corrected. I think they're getting a November release. So, is it going to be that one? And whatever studio puts out that first movie that kind of gets people back in theaters and shows, a good profit, that's going to be the company that kind of has the leg up moving forward, in terms of that, because you're going to be able to get people back into the theater, but other studios maybe not. Again, you have the built-in Marvel audience, so those are probably going to make some amount of money. Or Disney's going to inflate the numbers again because reasons. But it's something to look out for in the future. I thought it was kind of an interesting look on something that has really kind of hit a lot of people very hard in various portions of the entertainment industry. But I want to know what you think. Who do you think is going to put out the first big hit movie after the pandemic leaves, or after the pandemic has subsided and people have started to go back to theaters again? Who do you think is going to have the first big blockbuster? I want you to put the studio in the comments below, or any opinions you have about this, if any. If you care or not that Disney is closing their doors, or possibly closing their doors for another 7 months. Again, like I said, put your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?